All right, traders, this is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and this is your market and option recap for Monday, the 21st. So, a pretty interesting day. Adobe just announced an $8 billion stock buyback plan. I believe they're also acquiring a small firm as well, so that came out after hours. And why is my volume turned all the way up? Let me turn that down. So, a little bit of a tricky day, I would say, today because, whenever the last few months, the price action has been that whenever we have a little bit of a gap up, we just have difficulties maintaining it and pushing higher. So it always, I don't want to say always, but the last few months, that's just how it's been when we gap up a little bit. It's been very difficult to maintain. It just seems like the risk is to the downside when that occurs. And it's kind of what we had for the day. We started up about 60 basis points. Actually, I think we started right around here for the day. Yeah, actually, right here is the 5 minute bar. We try to go higher. I felt like we had one of these days last week where we tried to go higher and we kind of got squashed. So it does seem like there are either decent sellers out there, selling programs. It does seem like people are taking advantage whenever the market is up a little bit, and they're taking advantage of that and they're selling. So I think here was the day that I was talking about that. We ripped in the beginning of the day, and then we got squashed. So, you could kind of learn from this. It seems like the pattern is between 10:30 to 11:30. It seems like there's a seller that comes in and pushes down the market. Don't know if it's just one guy or girl, or if it's just somebody who's got a sell program and some algorithms that are jumping on top of that. But it's kind of it's a little bit predictable every day. Just the fact that you kind of look at the VIX every day, which is what I kind of gauge for when volatility comes in. And as soon as we start to kind of break the trend, we're getting a wash. So there's a couple ways. There's a couple, and don't worry, I'll get into today's option activity because it's not the same, in every name in every sector. But there's definitely some things to kind of safeguard your portfolio against this, which seems to be happening over and over. Again, not every day, but we've seen it now just several. It's happened several times a week where there's a seller that comes in and kind of pushes things around a little bit. So, what you want to kind of come up with is a little bit of a plan when you come into the day when especially when we're up 60 or 70 basis points. You should already be knowing that what you're going to do going into the day. Is it I'm going to be if you already have positions on, I'm going to be taking some profits in some names, and you have to kind of pick and choose, right? You kind of have to pick and choose a couple positions that you're going to do that in, and I could tell you what I did today. I did that, and I had one position on. It was a short-term position. It was a June position in ADM, and I took it off right at the beginning of the day. So, short-term positions. I say this a lot, so I apologize. If you hear me say this, but especially short-term options positions. This is a June position. It's not going to age like a fine wine. It doesn't work that way. You want to get them. You want to get the short-dated positions off sooner than later. And if you've got profits in them, of course you could let the last piece run if you so choose, and to try to get that big winner, right? I mean, it's always about having bigger winners than losers. So you just have to be mindful of that in short-term option plays, right? These short-term option plays right now are it's just going to be very difficult in this type of market when it's choppy to kind of keep them on. There's a purpose for short-term option plays. If you get a big bounce, you got to take a healthy target, if not the whole thing off. If you get a big winner out of a short-term option play. So anyway, that's my 2 cents about that. So you should already have your plan. So my plan for the day was to go ahead and take off more risk than put on for the day. So that was my plan, and I did that. So that coming into the day, you're going to have a different plan for different days. But when we're up, when futures are up, 70 basis points, you got to take some targets. All right, so I think I'm beating that one to a dead horse. So what did we see today in option activity? What did we see in terms of price action? Let me start with what I focused on in this weekend's newsletter. The industrial sector, very very strong today, and we got a little bit of a hint, even though there was no announcement about trade tariffs or anything like that. They started to get above this downward trend line last week, and this market, I think, again, you have to realize what kind of a market we're in right now. We're dealing with some headwinds with interest rates, with the U.S. dollar. So that could also be why we're kind of in this herky jerky type chop market, where when the market's up, people are taking profits. So, I think with the industrials, I think they showed some interesting moves here, and I think what we saw today was a little bit of a rotation into industrials and a rotation out of some things. Biotech got really hit, and I don't even know why. I didn't see any major headlines on it, but IBB was down 1.3%. The XBI ETF was down almost 2%. So it does feel like some money is being rotated around a little bit. But you start to look at some of these charts, and by the way, this is what we give. If I could bring this up. Let's try again. Let's see. Whoops. Let me bring up this weekend's newsletter. But this is what we give Tribeca Trade Group members every weekend. Get them ready. Some of the setups that I really like. So again, looking for something different. Honeywell, I thought, was a really good setup. Again, this went out this weekend, and even though Honeywell, you kind of want some stocks to finish on the highs for confirmation. I think this can continue to run. So you don't have to be too scared of a name that hasn't done anything for a while. And, if it's up 2%, you're like, oh, geez, I don't want to chase it. Well, I mean, it's a different story of chasing a name like, like something like this, for example, like right, which has been on an absolute tear. This, you may not, at this point, you're like, yeah, I'm not chasing this thing, and I don't blame you. But something like Honeywell, which hasn't done anything yet, I think, makes sense, and I think it could have a couple of days of gains. Another name that was in the weekend newsletter was Boeing. Boeing had a terrific day, gap up and finished right on the highs of the day. So, meanwhile, the overall indices, and especially tech and Qs, gave back a lot of today's gains. There was a lot of areas that did not do that. So you kind of just have to search those out and say, hey, maybe there's some different areas that are showing some strength right now. Why won't this let me bring this up? And kind of switch a little bit, switch some of your positions around a little bit. I thought FedEx was a nice setup. Now, I did not trade this. I did put on XLI, the industrials ETF, but I think this looks pretty good too. Even though it had a big day, what did this finish up? 2% on the day? I think it goes higher. So I think it's just kind of the start of a swing, right? I mean, sometimes swings, that's why they call them swing trades, is they could last for sometimes a week, sometimes a little bit longer, or sometimes only a few days. But I think this is just getting started, and I think some of these names are going to catch more momentum as a catch-up trade. Remember, last week we saw small caps go nuts, right? So especially in different sectors in small caps. So I think even though small caps are continuing to go higher here, I think some of these other areas like large caps, a couple different areas in large caps may catch up a little bit. So what else did we see today in terms of option activity? Geez, computer really does not want to cooperate. So let me bring up today's option activity. We'll go through a couple of the different trades that we saw today. I would say Twitter was probably one of the best trades. In the first couple hours of the day, this is kind of what we saw. A little bit of chippy BAC calls go up, a little bit of EA calls right off the bat, tiny bit of McDonald's calls. Really what we saw was a big chunky play in Twitter today. So Twitter, was not on my list really of names to watch going into today, but that's the beauty of option activity. If they're going to go after Twitter several times, and I'll show you the activity in Twitter today, then I want to be a part of it. Because certainly it's not pressing the highs yet, but a nice looking candle there in Twitter. Of course, Trade Alert is not going to work for me either. So I thought that was a really good trade because not only did we see one or two trades, I think we saw three or four different trades that went up, all of the aggressive nature. So I think that was one of the best trades of the day. You know, if you were looking for a day trade, I would say the day trade of the day was in WWE. World Wrestling. There was right away there was an order on the there was a headline on the tape, and then we saw call buying right simultaneously. And this was just in the first couple bars of this thing to get going, where we saw some calls being bought, and there was a rumor, and I don't even know if it was confirmed about Fox being that they're buying their broadcast or they're investing in it. And this thing went up 12 or 13%. I did not play this today, but a couple of the traders, a couple of members. So congratulations if you're watching this video. If it was one of you guys who traded it, congratulations. Real nice looking trade. And yeah, sometimes for these chatter names or when you see a headline with a name with a high short interest or decent short interest, these names can really run for a bit. All right, next on the list, and then we started to see some of the names that we saw last week. Range Resources, that's probably between that and ECA. There's been about five different names that we've seen that have just been getting crushed with option activity. ECA had a nice finish. I might as well go ahead and just switch to the daily charts. That was one name that did pretty well today, up 2.3%. But really, this RRC has just been absolutely crushing it recently over the last week. That's been the latest play, RRC. So we've seen this one several times. It's still below the 200-day moving average, and it's a pretty cheap stock. Again, with some of these stocks like ECA or RRC, Devon Energy is another one. I don't think sorry, not Devon Energy. Neighbors is another one that's pretty cheap. You could just buy stock. You don't even have to mess with that. Also, Chesapeake is another name that we've been seeing repeat call buying in. So these names have just absolutely been on a tear. I mean, look at what Chesapeake did today again. So once these names get going, and granted they've been doing nothing for a long time, they're going to get some momentum behind them. Yeah, the other name I keep mentioning Devon every once in a while because I'm still long Devon. This has been the best energy trade for me. I started buying this before it hit the 200-day moving average. I'm trying to take the target up here at this version point of control. I was actually on the offer today and did not get filled, so I'll try again to get out of the last piece of Devon. But from $32 to 42, maybe I'm being a little bit greedy on the last portion. But again, we talked about this in the beginning of the videos. You got to have some big winners. The big winners balance out the small losers. So that's why I'm kind of holding out for that 43. If not, if I can, if somebody takes me out on the offer, that's that would work as well. Unfortunately, I just did not get filled. BWP, that's another name. This is a pipeline name, but this is I would say the between the third to the fourth time that we've seen calls in this one. Another name below the 200-day moving average, but as long as you're defining your risk, maybe use the bottom of value here. But it's been very strong. Now they bring up Twitter. Here you go. You can see the Twitter calls. And then finally, just a little bit of call action turned up at the end of the day. And those were in names. There's a little bit of a dip buyer in IBB. We saw some AbbVie calls go up for this week. Maybe keep an eye on that name. We also saw a little bit of Q's calls go up into the weakness today. And then finally, ATVI. So there's a couple trades that we saw at the end of the day. But all in all, I think it's all about having a strategy, and it's kind of what we go over in the beginning of the day in the trading room, and we concentrate on a couple setups as well. So these are all things that Tribeca Trade Group members get. But yeah, I mean, my expectations for this week, it could be a little bit of a choppy market. Maybe I'm hoping that we grind higher. If we happen to have a big day too, that would be nice. But I think the option activity was fine today. There was one other trade that went up today. A really big trade in Baidu, and then I'll leave it here for the video. But I thought this was an interesting trade into the weakness today. They bought the August 240 calls. It was a nice $1.6 million trade that went up. Standalone again, opening trade, and it was swept as well. All right, so that's it for today's video. Have a great night, and see you tomorrow in the trading room.